So you're ready to really level up your English communication at work.
Smart move.
Especially because the World Economic Forum, they're predicting like almost a quarter of all jobs are going to be totally different in just 5 years.
Right. Because of all the tech advancements.
Yeah.
It's not just about, keeping up with AI and robots.
Right.
It's really about making sure your ideas, get heard, cut through the noise in this whole new world of work.
And especially because, with hybrid and remote work becoming so normal these days.
Oh, absolutely.
We're relying so much more on emails and chats and video calls.
Right. And that written communication, especially in English,
is
so important to be really clear because, one miscommunication in an email chain can be really expensive, have huge consequences.
Yeah, it makes those old, telephone game analogies from when we were kids feel way too real. So how do we even begin to tackle this? There's, a million pieces of advice out there.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Well, instead of getting lost in all the generic stuff, we've zeroed in on 3 key communication skills that will be tailoring to you specifically based on what you sent us.
Okay.
First up, clarity and concision.
Oh, okay. I get that. No one wants to read a novel and they just need the main takeaway.
Right.
But how do we actually make sure our messages are hitting the mark?
It's all about how people process information. Remember that report you shared on renewable energy?
Yeah.
Instead of burying the lead with a ton of background, you could have started with that powerful statistic like solar installations in your region have increased by 40%.
Oh, yeah.
Get people hooked with the main point, then give them the details.
That's a great example because it's so easy to kind of fall into that trap of building up to the big reveal.
Yeah.
But you're right. People are busy. Just hit them with the headline, then fill in the gaps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to skill number 2. Digital etiquette.
Okay.
It's not just about being polite. It's about projecting professionalism in a virtual world.
This reminds me of when I first started working remotely, I was a little too casual with emojis, in emails to my boss.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought I was being friendly, but looking back, it was probably a bit much.
That's a common mistake.
Yeah.
Emojis can be great for adding a touch of personality, but it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
A few well-placed emojis can convey warmth, but going overboard can come off as, not so professional.
Right.
Especially in formal communication.
So it's about being mindful of our audience and the context. What about formatting and tone? Any tips for navigating those digital minefields?
Think of your emails like mini presentations.
Oh, okay.
Clear formatting with bullet points, headings, makes things scannable, digestible. And tone, that's where things can get tricky. Because in written communication, we don't have body language. Vocal inflection.
Yeah.
Well-placed please or thank you goes a long way.
Yeah.
And so does positive language.
Right. An email can be so easily misinterpreted without those cues. It's all about setting that right tone right away. Okay, so we've covered clarity and concision, and we've tackled digital etiquette. What's that third skill we need to master?
This one is super relevant today. Leveraging AI tools smartly.
Okay.
Tools like Grammarly and Jasper are getting so popular.
Yeah.
And for good reason, they can be incredibly helpful, especially if English isn't your first language.
Yeah. This is where things get interesting. AI is everywhere these days. I've been messing around with Grammarly, and I have to say it's pretty impressive. But how much should we rely on these tools? Is there a risk of losing our own voice?
That's a great question. It's a balance. AI can be a powerful ally, but not a crutch.
Right.
Think of it as a writing assistant, not a ghostwriter.
Oh, okay.
Use it to catch typos, suggest better words, refine your tone, but always review and edit the output.
Right. Don't make sure it reflects you. So using AI to enhance our communication, not replace it. Exactly. Like having a super smart editor on call.
Exactly.
Right.
And just like you wouldn't submit a draft without reading it, you should never just trust AI to do all the work.
Right.
It's about using it strategically.
Okay.
To refine your writing, not write for you.
Got it.
Welcome back to our deep dive.
Thanks.
We just finished talking about using AI to boost your communication.
Right.
And now let's shift gears and talk about something you mentioned you wanted to improve.
Yeah.
Communication across cultures.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. I mean, it's one thing to write a clear email,
right?
But it's a whole other thing to make sure it lands well with somebody from a totally different background.
It's true. It's a common challenge.
Yeah.
And that's why just translating words isn't enough.
Right.
Remember that project proposal you were working on?
Yeah.
For that Japanese firm?
Yeah.
You mentioned struggling to get your point across effectively.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like we're speaking the same language, but still talking past each other.
Well, you mentioned in your notes being confused by the lack of direct feedback from your Japanese counterparts.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example of those cultural nuances in action.
Okay.
In Japanese business culture, direct confrontation is often avoided. Silence and indirect communication can actually show deep consideration.
Oh, wow.
Not disinterest.
That's a complete game changer. I was reading their silence as like a lack of engagement.
Right.
But maybe it means they're actually taking it really seriously.
It could be. This just highlights how important it is to really understand the specific cultural context you're working in. Communication styles can be so different.
Yeah.
Even when everyone's speaking English.
So it's almost like learning a whole new language on top of English.
Exactly.
The language of cultural cues and like unspoken expectations.
It is. And that's why I always say, approach intercultural communication with curiosity and a willingness to learn. Don't be afraid to ask questions and clarify anything that seems ambiguous.
So instead of just assuming I understand what's being communicated, I should check my assumptions and ask for clarification.
Exactly. Like you could say, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your perspective. Could you elaborate on it? Not only does that help avoid misunderstandings, it also shows respect for the other person's culture.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's about being proactive and open to learning. Now, what about when, like, despite your best efforts, conflict arises? How do we navigate those tricky conversations, especially with those cultural differences in play?
Yeah, conflict is inevitable in any workplace, but it can be especially challenging when cultural differences come into play. Let's unpack a scenario that often causes friction.
Okay.
Giving and receiving feedback.
Oh, that's a minefield for sure. I once had a manager who was very direct with feedback, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
But I know that doesn't work for everyone, especially in certain cultures.
That's a key point. Direct feedback, while it's normal in some Western cultures, it can be seen as disrespectful or even aggressive in other cultures. For instance, in some Asian cultures, feedback is given indirectly. Focusing on suggestions for improvement rather than pointing out flaws.
That's so interesting. So how do we give and receive feedback well in a cross-cultural setting?
First, be mindful of your audience and their background. If you're unsure about their preferred communication style, just ask. It's always better to err on the side of caution and be more indirect than to risk offending someone.
So instead of saying, you need to improve your presentation skills, I might say, I have some ideas that might help make your presentations even more engaging. Would you be open to hearing them?
That's a great example.
Okay.
You're framing the feedback as a suggestion, not a criticism, which will likely be better received.
Okay.
Similarly, when you're receiving feedback, try to understand the intent, even if the delivery feels strange.
So if someone is being very indirect with their feedback, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not being critical.
It could just be their way of doing it in a way that feels culturally appropriate. Remember, communication is about so much more than just the words. It's about understanding those underlying cultural norms and expectations
that shape how those words are interpreted.
Exactly.
This is reminding me of something we talked about in part 1 about active listening. Really paying attention, not just to what's being said, but how it's being said can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And speaking of listening, I think it's time we turn our attention to a topic that can make or break communication, especially at work. Power dynamics.
Back for the final part of our deep dive.
That's been great.
Yeah, it really has. We've covered so much.
We have.
You know, from crafting clear messages to understanding different cultures. But now let's tackle something that can be a bit of a minefield. Power dynamics. In communication.
This is where even the most skilled communicators can really stumble. We're talking about that unspoken hierarchy that exists in every workplace. The invisible forces that shape how we interact with colleagues, superiors, even subordinates.
You know, this makes me think about a situation you talked about in your notes. You mentioned feeling hesitant to speak up in a meeting. Where your manager was present, even though you had valuable insights to share.
That hesitation, it's such a common reaction. It's all about navigating that perceived power imbalance. And it can lead to, you know, valuable ideas being suppressed. just because someone feels they don't have the right to speak up.
Yeah.
This is especially relevant in more hierarchical structures.
Like the one I'm in.
Exactly.
It's almost like there's this unwritten rule book for how we're supposed to communicate based on where we are on that corporate ladder.
Yes.
Breaking those unwritten rules feels risky.
It can be, yeah. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of these dynamics, both for ourselves and for others.
Yeah.
Recognizing that those power imbalances exist.
Yeah.
That's the first step towards a more inclusive and equitable communication environment.
So how do we actually do that? How do we dismantle these invisible barriers and encourage everyone to contribute?
One simple but really powerful strategy is to actively invite contributions from those who might be hesitant.
Yeah.
You know, in that meeting you mentioned, your manager could have said, I'm really interested in hearing everyone's perspective, especially from those who might have a different view.
That's such a simple but effective way to make it more inclusive.
It is.
It makes it clear that everyone's voice matters, no matter their title.
It's about shifting the focus from hierarchy to collaboration.
Okay, I like that.
Now, let's talk about another communication challenge that's linked to power dynamics.
Okay.
Giving and receiving feedback.
Ooh, feedback. That's a loaded word.
It is.
Especially when it's coming from someone, in a position of authority.
Absolutely. But feedback is essential for growth, no matter who's giving or receiving it.
Right.
But the way we do it can be hugely affected by those power dynamics.
Yeah. This reminds me of another incident you shared.
Oh, yeah?
You got some constructive criticism from a colleague who was more junior than you.
Yeah.
And you admitted to feeling kind of defensive about it.
It's a natural reaction.
Yeah.
When someone we see as having less authority, challenges our work, it can trigger those defenses.
Yeah.
But feedback is valuable no matter where it comes from.
So how do we deal with those situations where the power dynamic makes us resist feedback?
One strategy is to come at it with a growth mindset.
Okay.
Instead of seeing it as an attack,
view
it as a chance to learn and improve.
Okay.
Ask clarifying questions, try to understand their perspective, and try to separate the message from the messenger.
So even if it feels uncomfortable, try to focus on what's actually being said.
Exactly.
Not the power dynamic.
Right. And remember, feedback is a two-way street. As someone in a position of authority, you need to create a safe space for your team to give you feedback too.
Makes sense. It's about that culture of open communication.
Yes.
Where everyone's comfortable sharing no matter their position.
Exactly. And that's what mastering communication is all about. Creating an environment where everyone feels heard, respected, and empowered to do their best.
This deep dive has been awesome.
It has.
We've gone over being clear and concise, the importance of understanding those cultural differences, and how to handle those tricky power dynamics.
It's been a journey.
And remember, effective communication isn't just about mastering skills.
It's a mindset, continuous learning, empathy, and that genuine desire to connect with others.
We hope this deep dive has given you the tools you need to level up your communication skills.
Keep practicing.
Keep practicing, keep experimenting.
And most importantly, keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.